Over the past few years, I've had the privilege of watching the rise of Hey, Dip Your Toes In, an amazing travel, food, lifestyle platform that essentially shares vibrant cultural stories. The site, which was launched by Omo and Eulanda Osagiede, became an outgrowth of what they'd already been doing, documenting their travels for friends and family on social media. But once it became apparent that others just might be interested, they launched their site in 2015, and their story has been growing ever since. The Black Expat was fortunate to feature them early in their journey, and really early in ours, as we interviewed them in March of 2016, which was only a month after we went live. In that interview, they discussed their personal story. Eulanda, who's originally from the US, and Omo, who comes from Nigeria, shared the keys to making their cross-cultural marriage and partnership work while living in London. Much of their interview is still relevant today, but I wanted to catch up with them to see how their brand was faring in the crazy year that was 2020. As digital marketers and travel influencers, they share how they had to pivot after dealing with the impact of COVID on their industry, business, and really everything else. Omo and Eulanda detail how their business changed and really the need for them to go back to the basics. They also talk about the real life of doing business as travel content creators, and they dispel a lot of the misconceptions about what it takes. There's also some candid conversation about living in the United Kingdom while social and political unrest is happening at home. These two are pretty authentic storytellers, and I know you'll enjoy their insight. Welcome to the Global Chatter.
Man, I read this article and it was a number of British folks who had, or they had been living, like, for example, like in Spain. And then all of a sudden reality hit it. And I sat there and I thought to myself, but what did you think was gonna that freedom of movement goes both ways. It isn't just.
We've heard so many of those stories in the last year.
We've met people while traveling.
Yeah.
That,
really?
Other Europeans that voted for, or no, let's say other Brits that voted for Brexit, that
right,
who suddenly are realizing that life is not going to be business as usual for them in those countries where they currently live.
Exactly.
Well, they better get used to the visa runs and all the other
right? Extra fees, all the extras.
I mean, I'm trying to be sympathetic, but then it just tells me one of two things. You didn't read the details, which I know there's that contingent, right? It's like the people who said, I don't like Obamacare, but I like ACA. Like what? Like, bruh, that's the same thing.
Okay.
And then there are the people who, what you wanted is you didn't want the other people in your space, right, which I find ironic because you're not even in the space, but that's just me. So I'm curious with you guys. Like I reference, obviously I had talked to you a couple of years ago and your site was just like, your brand was just a year in. So I think you launched 2015. Hey, you dipped your toes in. Does that sound about right?
Yeah.
And so I talked to you in March of 2016, and now we're at the tip of 2021. What has changed? Like, what have you guys are both this big. What is so much different than when you guys started?
Oh my goodness.
I think the fundamental things that we have changed as people, we've evolved in the way we write, in the way we create content, in the way we like to travel, in the way we want to tell stories. We've evolved in the kind of stories we want to tell. And as that evolution has happened, I think the blog itself has gone on that same journey with us. So that's pretty much how I would summarize it.
And I think back then we weren't looking at Hey, Dip Your Toes In as a business.
Mm-hmm.
And we weren't looking at it as like this greater community and platform that brings people together. So that definitely was given a lot more definition or let's say it's been a lot more defined over the years and has gone through lots of different changes and growing pains and really amazing opportunities as well. So yeah, it's definitely, I feel like we've kind of put ourselves in this position where we've been forced to create opportunities, and not just for ourselves, but also for others, because of deciding to take very much like a community approach. So it's been a really fun 5 years. Definitely challenging, but it's great.
Yeah, but fun along the way.
So I was curious, just having seen you guys go through that evolution, what would you said originally was your main mission? Like, what did you think you were going to do when you first launched?
To be 100% honest, and if I would have to re-listen to that podcast we did so long ago, because I was probably faking the funk back then. I was like, oh wow, I'm getting invited to talk on a podcast. Yes, okay, wow, that's so cool, Betty. But back then, honestly, Amanda, for us. Hey, Dip Your Toes In was purely a space, a digital journal of sorts.
A creative outlet.
Creative outlets, almost an online diary in many cases, where we can share our travel and food stories, so that they were no longer living on Facebook. And we outgrew that very quickly, because by the nature of the people that we are and how we share stories and how we communicate with others, and also the fact that we had a very high level. I felt like we came in with a very, very high expectations of ourselves. And so with that high expectation, then you start trying to produce content, at a higher level. And soon, brands started coming to us. And that, I think, honestly, that was that kind of like kick in the bum for us both in 2016, a few months after we recorded the podcast, that we were like, okay, we need to get our stuff together. This is this is like real stuff. We need to figure out pricing, and is this a business? Like, what is this? What are we doing with this all? So yeah, it was definitely a bit by force, but it was something that we were really excited to start that journey and that trajectory.
So if someone has no idea who you guys are and what you do, how would you describe your brand today?
Well, Hey Dip Your Toes In is a creative platform where we basically tell food cultural and what would you say?
Food culture stories.
Food culture
so
stories.
We explore food culture stories through the lens of travel.
Yeah.
And those two ideas can be, coexist, or they can be quite separate. Sometimes it's just travel stories from a more cultural element, and other times it's purely food culture stories.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And, we would now describe ourselves as influencers, and we would describe ourselves as digital marketers as well. So.
And I was going to ask you that, because given obviously 2020 has been a wild year for everyone for a variety of reasons. And I completely follow you guys just in general, because I like your photos. I'm like I could go there for deep other stuff, but I'm like, no, I actually really like their photos, because you guys have really bright photos and they make me happy. So I guess when I think about 2020, and how much travel has been influenced or has been impacted, how have you guys kind of navigated kind of this time where maybe you haven't been able to go to some of the places you would have liked to gone this year?
That's been a really fun, honestly. I mean, outside of the fact that, it was really devastating not to be able to pursue a lot of opportunities that we had set up. In the travel, in the travel arena, and lots of contracts were frozen. So it was definitely a hit financially. But on the other side of it was this incredible pivot, and being able to still work with travel brands and to create digital content campaigns that were not contingent on us being in these particular destinations. So for us, that was really exciting to create travel recovery campaigns, that where we didn't have to necessarily go to the destination. And that's really opened up a whole other vein, of communication with these different destinations. And it has opened up a whole kind of vein of creativity for us both as well.
Yeah.
And with thinking through ideas of, how does this look from a marketing perspective? How does it look from an audience perspective that will be consuming this content? Will it encourage them to think about traveling to this destination? And then when does that type of campaign need to be launched? And these are the conversations that we'll be having with destination partners. And that's been really exciting for us both.
Wow. I would have never thought about that. Because my first thought, but honestly, I think when I think about folks, particularly in the travel space, I mean, obviously you have other components. My first thought would have been, oh my God, and I have friends, you can't go to the places you were planned to going or the places that you wanted to go because COVID stops you, right? So then how do you still give content and give purpose even though you're not there? And so I think the ability to pivot, and I don't think people understand how much you have to do. I think when you're a content creator, how much you have to pivot. But was it challenging at first trying to go that direction?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm looking at between March and April.
Yeah, I think like most of the world, we were shell-shocked, didn't have a clue what was going on, how long this thing was going to last for, try to adjust to everything being cancelled in quick succession. We were actually supposed to speak at the first conference. Our first speaking gig for the year was going to be in March, right?
Yes, March, like around the 14th, 15th. 14th
or 15th. And even up until the 2 or 3 days before the thing was actually supposed to happen.
In Sicily and Italy.
We still didn't know whether it was going ahead or not, and of course they had to cancel last minute. So that whole uncertainty played a big role in how the year shaped out to be. So once we eventually overcame that confusion and lack of direction.
And a bit of depression too.
Yeah.
I was wrapped up in a red robe for 2 weeks. Wrapped up with Netflix.
I can't go nowhere.
Yes.
Yeah, it was
seriously, because you just kept reflecting on everything that you lost, and you know that even though they were like, "Oh, it's going to get better," and our prime minister too was like, "Oh yes, it's only going to be another 4 weeks," and you're like,
yeah, okay.
And you're just looking at this unfold all over the world, and you're like, "There's no way."
Right?
You just knew that was not going to happen, and so that depression really can be really triggered, and it was hard. It was really, really hard.
So yeah, the way we pivoted wasn't exactly deliberate to start with. We just simply went back to the basics of just creating just random fun
stuff that
excited us,
entertained us,
that helped uplift our spirits, and we hoped would uplift the spirit of our audience. And so we just kind of just went back into that creative cycle, and that's
creativity kind of saved our mental health.
Yeah,
honestly, because it was on that verge, and like so many people that we know that we've talked to that are struggling with their mental health right now.
Yeah. Yep.
And for us, creativity, it really was that thing that really did pull us back from, at least me, myself. We have different levels of how we're feeling in terms of, depression or anything like that, or what our struggles. So in terms for self-care, I can really, really kind of ascertain it to creativity and be able to kind of tap into those creative veins through TikTok, and TikTok became like our new thing. It was fun, and every day I was pouring over TikTok.
Wait, are y'all TikTokers? No, for real. Are you TikTokers?
Not anymore. Like it was a moment. It was a season. We were like dedicated. We were creating videos. We were buying things on Amazon for costumes and stuff like that, for all the extras. We really got into it for a minute, and we needed that. And then we launched a digital like a digital education series on Instagram called and YouTube called School Days. And so it was like, oh goodness, how many months was that? 3 months? I think it was like 3 months every week.
Every week, just had a new guest. A content creator to just talk about a topic.
And then record a tutorial with them, having to edit that every single week.
Right.
So it was like this intense production schedule, with producing a podcast. It's a lot of work. But it got me so fired up and revved up about content and pivoting and creating. And it was honestly, I feel like I needed that. And I was almost grateful for this time and for this year I'm not grateful for everything that, let's say, for the pandemic, but in itself, but I'm grateful for this time period that allowed to kind of incubate me and to kind of push me to another level where I was like, honey, here's this really cool idea. And then he'd be like, okay, what do you need from me? Kind of thing. What can I do to kind of like push that part to the next level as well? So it was really fun being able to come together with these creative ideas and just kind of let our creativity take us.
So let me ask you guys this question. And I know the answer, but this is for the people who are listening. You guys create content, I create content, and given the space that you're in that's very visual, what do you think are some of the misconceptions people have about the work that you do?
They always think it's like quite glamorous, especially when it's kind of, I guess, attached to travel.
Yep.
And then they always feel like you're getting all these incredible gifts or freebies, but there's always strings attached. And that's the thing, is that people don't realize there's so many strings attached with, say, like free travel or any kind of gift or product that you might receive. And so over the last few years, like I would say when we met you and filmed the podcast, recorded the podcast, and then we started going into a lot more travel and a lot more travel opportunities, working with different publications. We were really on this high about comped travel and doing like pet press trips. And so a lot of stuff was like unpaid press trips in the beginning. And then we started moving into, paid travel. But it's so much work, on the back end. And people don't see that you go to the destination, you show it off on, say, like Instagram stories. But that's part of the deliverables, for a brand. And then you are waking up or going to bed every single night, early or late, because you're up for hours ahead, maybe of other people or even traditional journalists trying to get that content out, going out and getting, content at the best time of day, just so that you can get things where you might feature yourself in destinations without a lot of people. And it's a lot of planning. And, some people are like, yeah, but what a hard life,
right.
You live or something like that. And you're like, okay, no, I'm grateful for it. I'm grateful for the opportunities. I'm grateful for being able to experience some of these incredible, experiences. But it's a double negative, sorry. Experience some of these incredible experiences. But, when it comes down to it, there are opportunities, but you have to weigh them because not all that glitters is gold. So when people are asking about getting into the content creation space and trying to take advantage of free travel or get free travel opportunities,
right?
I just say, really think about what you want out of this and, take it, just need to really take it seriously. And also don't overextend yourself for any brand or, any destination partner just because you want free travel. Because in the end, you end up paying for this opportunity because you have to declare it in your taxes already. So there's a lot there and a lot of misconceptions, I think, in the industry.
I think you used a really good word, like glamorous, because there's just, I think people just assume you show up, you take photos, you get stuff for free, and there it is. And I was like, look, Nobody knows this because it was so tiny. I had a travel blog for like 2 minutes. Okay. Like literally 2 minutes. You know how you were TikTokers for a second? Like I was like half of that and had a travel blog. It said, y'all, you know what? I travel all the time. I love seeing the world. I realize I'm not committed enough to share it with everybody else. Because I look at some of the work y'all do and some of my favorite folks, and I'm like, y'all be out there taking photos. And I know it's a long day because you're getting the details and you got to write, and then you got to put it whatever medium and mechanism you're using. So, of course, we're talking video, audio on your site, on their site, if you've got to write a post. And just... people don't get that. I mean, to a certain degree, I get that with the Black Expat because they're like, oh, we have the site and the stuff is here. And I'm like, you have no idea how much of my life is dedicated to just getting, even with other people, getting things at least in a way that people can consume. And then obviously managing your social media. And so I trust and believe there are folks who just see what you do and think, I can do it. But then I always go, yeah, but do you have the work ethic?
Right.
Yeah.
There you go.
And so some of it even happens before the photos before you take the first photos. Getting the opportunities themselves involves you pitching to the brands, negotiating with them prices, getting into their own sort of approval cycles of quality reviews, getting stuff approved and then sent out for publication or for printing or for whatever. That whole cycle takes its own time and effort before you then actually start capturing the content itself that eventually gets presented. So yeah, there is work involved. So one of the misconceptions, like you said, is that you just show up and take photos. For people who take this seriously, for brands who take this seriously, there's a lot more that goes on in the background. Location
scouting, wardrobe planning. It's a lot. You end up becoming your own independent production house in some cases because brands are hiring you because they want to see a specific type of visual identity in the imagery, whether that's imagery through videos or photos. So you have to be very intentional about it. It's not just showing up and saying, okay, I'm going to do a few street photographs. And that is not to discount street photography because we love street photography and we do that. And in fact, for us, sometimes it's a bit of a relief because we can just shoot whatever we want.
Yeah.
But oftentimes we're working with destination partners that because they've seen what we produce maybe on Instagram, they want that type of look. So it has to be stylized. And we have to be very intentional about how we shoot.
We did I think back in 2017, we did a video series in the Netherlands and we did some shooting in Canada. And it's funny to me that since then, everyone's like, oh my gosh, you're a massive team that produced these videos. I was like, it was me and a dude. Okay. Running around the Netherlands and Canada with like the equipment, like me hiding on the ground, like he's shooting and like we're getting the question, feeding and miking people. And I go, many of us who do this kind of work, it's not like people are ready there to do it. You actually have to be committed to make it and look the way you guys do, and to make the stuff look the way we do. And so I always think it's super important, especially for the folks who are listening in who will think, okay, this is something I want to get into. I always encourage folks, but they got to know when you're, especially if you are working with a brand or you're just building your own brand, you got to hustle. Like this ain't, it looks glamorous, but it's not as glamorous as you may think, but I think that the mission and the purpose, especially what you guys do. And so we're going to take a break. And then when we come back, we're going to talk about this summer because there were a lot of things that happened this summer, including some blog posts I read on your site and kind of go from there. All right, so I wanted to pick up from a post I actually read on your site called So You Want to Be an Ally. I read it when it came out because, believe it or not, in my non-existent time, I actually read stuff from other people. I get up honestly, I get up at like 4 a.m. and you guys would be amazed what I'm doing at 4 a.m. But I read your post. And who wrote the post? Just was it Omo? Was it you or was it Yolanda?
Yeah.
Okay.
Omo wrote that one.
And I read the post and I read it again, knowing that I would talk to you guys, and I was just kind of sitting in it. And so I would love to just hear in your own words, what kind of led you to just go ahead and write that post?
Oh,
wow. There was a lot. I mean, so to kind of preface that, a few years ago, this 2016, now actually, goodness, this time has passed very quickly. 2016, I went to my first BLM protest in London. And, I grew up like in a family going to marches. Like we had the Martin Luther King March. We went every year, going to protests. Like I was used to that kind of form of engagement, and expressing civil freedoms and standing up for any type of social political issue that was being kind of really discussed at the time. So whenever everything really popped off, and I'll just use that term, popped off, not literally, but I guess it could be used literally.
No, it did. It did. If you were in Portland, it definitely popped off.
All of it popped off.
It did. Yeah.
We ended up getting a surge of people that began coming to our blog, engaging with us, like primarily through Instagram and secondly through Twitter. And it was like the Great White Awakening.
We did too. We did too. So I feel you. We did.
It was like all of a sudden, I'm white. I have privilege. Please teach me. And and it was exhausting because we were having phone calls and oh my goodness, the emails and DMs of people leaving like 4 or 5 voice notes, of talking about their experience and their, like their coming to Jesus moments. And, it was just, it was really, for us, it was really laborious. Like we were exhausted physically, mentally, emotionally, and we needed to be able to put boundaries in place. And so we talked about having an article that we would put out where people can just go, a resource really, that talked about allyship, because that was one thing both of us were kind of like, because we write separately, we were writing lots of posts that were going out to our different circles on, online. And this whole idea of like what an ally looks like was really important to discuss because allyship looks different for everyone. However, there is a basic premise in place. And part of that is recognizing your privilege and listening. So, and actively listening. And then putting your listening into action. And so, Omo really kind of, from there, just kind of like went off and began to write.
Yeah. And I felt that it would make more sense if I wrote about a personal experience and wrote about the allyship topic from a place of personal experience. And so I remembered that travel experience I had going to this particular country with a group of, other journalists who were all white. And just one encounter that I faced as a Black traveler that they were completely blind to. And that just gave me an inroad into explaining and what being an ally would have meant to me in that situation from my white colleagues. So, hopefully, the message was well received by people who read it. But like she said, it was really just our way of trying to put all our thoughts into one place and telling people, okay, you want to be an ally, here's what we think, go off and read that. And if you still need to learn more, then, come back to us. But this is where you start from, first of all.
I think some of the best writing I've seen from colleagues has definitely been, unfortunately, kind of through the trauma of that period. Because, and I definitely echo the sentiment of, for me, I would use the word overwhelming when everything kind of hit, and then there was you guys know this, there was a move to amplify Black voices, right? But it's like, I don't know if people told the Black folks they were about to be amplified. They did not. And so I was kind of looking at our platforms, looking at our back end of our site, and I was seeing all these people which is totally great, whatever. Like, we're called the Black Expat. You know what you're going to get. So there's no, you are making a conscious decision if you're coming to something called the Black Expat. But I saw all these questions as well that were coming our end and that people wanted answers to. And I kept giving, and I've said this on the podcast before, I kept giving this analogy, though. When people are in the middle of a trauma, it's like if you've been hit by a bus. You've been hit by a bus and someone is asking you, what is it like to be hit by a bus? You have fallen on the ground because you've been hit by a bus. And someone is still asking you, what is it like to be hit by the bus? The bus has driven over you again and is down in the distance. You're like, but what's it feel like to be hit by a bus? And so when I looked at the summer, for me, I was sort of like, we want to amplify, we want to fix all these things, we want to do all this stuff, but people are still trying to deal with trauma. They're still trying to deal and collective trauma, right? Because it isn't just, fine, George Floyd, but when we think about cases, of course, other cases in the US, we think about cases in the UK, we think about cases in France. I had someone on who is a Black French person and was talking about brutality against immigrants and Black and brown folks in France, right? When you say pop off, it's like everybody has something to say, right? Because this has been a collective trauma. And so that being said, when I read your piece, I thought this was such a really nice way and a very human way to sort of say, look, you want to be an ally. Here's the real stuff that you do here. And here is the place of where I'm coming from my own personal experience. So it doesn't have to be abstract. You follow this blog, you follow us. This is like real life. This isn't, I heard through a newspaper. And so I think that's why it really resonated with me. And so I started thinking about you guys in terms of, as folks who are in the space that you're in, what are some of the challenges that maybe folks don't necessarily understand that you may face as Black influencers that are different from others? Because I do know that a good portion of our audience is not Black. And so I don't think, I don't want to presume that they know what makes it a little bit different for you as an influencer that maybe a white influencer, especially in travel and food, doesn't have to experience.
Oh goodness, there's so many. I remember, I think last year, being interviewed for a BBC podcast about pay gap, the pay gap, and it being based on the fact that brands have negotiated with us and have tried to offer us a lower rate or no payment for work versus our same counterparts, that influencers who are white, creating content that might be going on the same trip and are being paid. Things like that. And those types of conversations that you have to navigate. And oftentimes and that leads you to a whole nother part of this whole conversation, is that oftentimes you might tell a white audience member that doesn't quite understand, why this stuff is going on. And then they come up and they're bringing up, arguments for both sides. And they might say, oh, well, how do you know, that it wasn't because that particular influencer had more experience than you, or maybe a more established, brand presence with you. And the thing is, as I said, one time someone had said that, and I said, would you say the same thing to a white influencer, if they were talking about us being paid and not them? What they don't have to defend themselves. They don't have to fight, for a higher wage or a wage at all, because they're being offered this. And, lay the facts on the table and then look at them and decide, before you immediately trying to say, oh, well, is it really equitable? Because it's not equitable. And that's what we are looking to try to kind of establish the fact that no, we do have equity right now, and it's just all based on everything is fine and everything is equal, and you're just saying, okay, do white creators have to go through that fight? And oftentimes they're not. You might have female white creators that have not been paid as well as, say, like a white male creator. And then, we have misogyny and we have sexism. So there's those verticals, of course, in conversation. And then you have things about like, body type and being a plus size influencer and, things like that. But what happens is when you have these intersections, you have, say, like a Black woman who's also plus size, who is also maybe queer, and what kind of work are they getting? Things like that. So these are things that, things that Black influencers are having to discuss and having to talk about. I mean, just let's say December last year, I was speaking at an event where the man introduced me, the commentator introduced me as the talking cucumber. I know. This was things like, huh? And what's the right? Let me give some context. Let's pause. Of context.
I need context for.
Yes,
just
I know. I know everyone listening is probably like, what in the world? What? I don't understand. I didn't understand. But the connection is that, so it was a journalism PR event, and there were editors from all these top publications in the UK speaking on the panel. So there's like 4 of us on the panel.
And they wanted like an influencer perspective, so they put you there.
Yeah.
Right?
So someone who was an influencer and a journalist, both. So they thought that was a really vital perspective to have on the panel. And the commentator is he was like some TV presenter.
Yeah,
older.
He'd had a big career in TV, like in the 70s, 80s, and some radio stuff, since then. He's he's part of the establishment pretty much.
Yeah.
Clearly.
The White Tower.
Clearly.
That is now crumbling.
Right.
So he was asking the journalists who'd all come together, we'd all come together, editors or whatever, say they weren't just journalists, but editors, and was asking about our background so you can have a little bit more information to introduce us with for the panel, because each person would be introduced separately. So then he gets to me and he interrupts me as I'm talking to him and explaining who I am and what I do. And he's like, do you know, you have the most perfect voice for radio. And I was like, oh, I said that, that's lovely. He's like, have you ever thought about pursuing a voiceover career in voiceover work? And I said, well, actually, when I said, funny story. It's like when I was in undergrad, I actually used to support myself by doing, not radio, cartoon voiceovers. And he was like, oh, brilliant. What cartoon? He asked me what cartoon it was he said, what was your favorite character? And I said, oh, it's like a talking cucumber. And I just kind of laughed. So then when he gets to introduce me, he gives no context about all the other things I talked to him about what I do. He introduces me as the talking cucumber and says, with great hair.
Meanwhile, he's introduced all the other journalists as editor of this, editor of that, this person that, and then
tries to put his arm around me like that.
Yeah, let's just say that evening was not the best.
But it's not a one-off. Yeah. These things happen. I'd had 2 incidents very similarly that had happened within maybe a month and a half of each other. So these are things that our white colleagues are not having to experience. And so, they are very much, they're very much positioned by the fact that we are Black content creators working in an industry that is very much, let's say, in an industry that needs to be decolonized.
Well, and let me ask you this question. Like I'm still perplexed that folks could not imagine that folks that look like you do what you do, or travel still like. I know this. I know once again, run aside the black. So I'm not feigning ignorance on this, but I'm still amazed how people are shocked or surprised or don't value as much the kind of work that you do. If for nothing else, dollars and cents, right? Euros and pounds, like, and I know it's not your soul lane, but if nothing else, you could say, well, maybe they can get more Black people to travel to places they wouldn't go, like at a very basic level. And I think that's the part that completely like plummets me, is that people are still like, you know, they can't look at your achievements and look at what you've done, or still because they are devaluing it. It's not even that, like, they're putting a value on it. They're just valuing it less. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And
absolutely.
Yeah. I don't know. Travel. And I guess it irritates me with travel, because part of travel is to see the other parts of the world. Right. And if you, so like, if you go to other parts of the world, you're going to see all kinds of people. So why wouldn't you, I don't know, have all kinds of people that you want to...
Exactly. That's what you would think. You would think that would just be a natural inclination.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, it's not. I think there's been this view by non-people of color that everything else is the other. And everything exists to, in a sense, serve them and make them feel comfortable. You know, the fact that when you hear like the language of, oh, I went to that country and they didn't speak English. You know, I talked to that waiter and they didn't speak English. You know, things
because
like
they were
that.
colonized by somebody different, but that's a whole nother side story.
Exactly. Right. And you know, what's interesting enough is you keep talking and digging a bit deeper, and it's not just white people. Oftentimes privilege, you know, the face of privilege is no longer just white.
Yeah.
So you start to go in a bit deeper on that too, as well, is that, you know, privilege has reared its ugly head, and it's, you know, primarily, yes, it is colonized from a white lens, but privilege has also been, the more people have access to it, you know, the more diverse it gets, unfortunately. So I think being able to recognize that we have different aspects of privilege in our life and then seek to dismantle that or use our privilege for good, and being able to, you know, really like tell these stories and create opportunities for others that don't, or maybe who weren't afforded the same privileges.
So then let's flip it. How do you guys think that in the way that you travel and the way you share stories might be different than from someone who may come from a privileged space in terms of, let's say, racial background? So how do you think you stand out, or how do you handle your business differently?
Well, I think we're able to tell stories, first of all, from the perspective of the world that we live in, the world that we exist in. You know, obviously, we look different from what people tend, you know, what the industry says, or what the industry tends to show on the cover of magazines. So when we go to these countries or go into these places, we have encounters with people, we have interactions with locals, we have things that happen to us that are unique to us because of who we are and the way we look. Pretty much, end of story. So we're able to bring those perspectives into the content we create. We're able to talk about the time we went to Morocco, for example, and met a Berber, a guy who's from the Berber tribe, who was able to identify with me as a Nigerian because we have, you know, both countries share similarities in some cultural aspects, and we're able to connect on that level. We're able to tell that story from a place of authenticity, and that I think that sort of helps us bring that unique aspect to the content that we create. And there's so many examples like that of how we feel that we're able to make those more just human connections and tell those stories from a place of authenticity. I think that just generally helps us kind of stand out in the competition, from the competition rather.
And the fact too that we do love to question ourselves and not assume things just because we believe that diversity provides us access to unique stories doesn't mean that we should necessarily always take advantage of it in that moment. Because if the story is not serving the community in the way that it should be, then, is it really a story that we need to tell? So there are times we've had to walk away from stories, or we've had to kind of reframe the narrative because we were looking at our own privilege and maybe the way that we might have ascertained the story or got access to the story, and have said, is that really how the story needs to be told? So it's interesting. We have lots of examples of that, but yeah, I think that's something that really does kind of provide a checks and balance system for us as well as journalists. And sometimes we don't always see that a lot in the industry because there are a lot of story chasers and they're looking for that, that byline that's just going to zing, and I've got to, it doesn't matter, whatever kind of access I can get to the story, I'm going to get it and I'm going to tell it, things like that. And, I always say it's like, look at how you're amplifying, the focus of the story. Like, is the focus of the story the way that you're telling the story, or is it the story itself? So for us, those are questions that we're constantly kind of pondering over.
I love the fact that you guys are actually sensitive to that, because I think that's always the thing that concerns me when I talk to some folks, is that either they want to center themselves or they're not looking at the impact of who they're sharing the story about. And I think the fact that even your awareness of your own privilege, because let's be honest, we are all Western passport holders here, which I will get to in a moment. And I don't know about you, Omo, but I come from a mixed nationality family in terms of, some of us have Western passports. Most of us have Cameroonian passports. And so, I think that's the thing that's always humbled me whenever I even start to talk about like travel and other things, is because I've seen it play out in my own family who doesn't get to get a visa. And so I love the fact that you guys are sensitive to that, because I think that's something I always have to kind of tell folks especially when you're telling a story from a position of authority in your mind. And I go, yeah, but not everyone has that access. Not everyone has that ability. And I have that conversations more and more with Black folks too, especially if they're Western Black folks, because there's some things that they say and I go, yeah, but you're American, Canadian, British, French. Okay. Does that apply if you're Kenyan, Ghanaian, Tanzanian, or Cameroonian, or Jamaican, or Trini? Does it apply? And then they don't realize that their privilege is talking, and it's not a universal rule. So I which is why I didn't say this earlier, I actually read your Facebook posts, by the way, and they're so good. But I never have that. And here's the thing. So hate relationship with Facebook. I'm on there for business. I've been on there since 2005. Okay. So I'm literally one of the early adopters of that thing. At this point, I'm a lurker and I got to post business, but like I'll come. But the funny thing is that it gives us so much referral traffic. Like I do the bare minimum on Facebook, and yet it's still our number one. And I'm like, well, I can't kill it yet, right? Because you can't kill the golden goose.
Facebook is still important for that reason.
Because but I read your Facebook post, and I personally like when you start to talk about politics and kind of social aspects of things, because I think you give a really good view of someone who is in the West, but someone who also understands, like particularly when you're talking a dichotomy between the West and maybe what's happening on the African continent. Because sometimes I see your post, I'm like, this is like arguing with my uncles. Like there's stuff that goes down. There's stuff that goes down, and I'm like, these are the WhatsApp messages that I ignore, because you guys start going into conspiracy theories, and I'm just like, and this is why we don't talk to y'all. And so, but I'm saying this with a purpose, but I will always read. I'm like, when I see a long post, I'm like, oh, this is going to be good. I agree. I'm not going to say anything, but I made sure I said it on camera. So everyone's heard it in case, your next.
Thank you.
But one thing I wanted to ask both of you, obviously we talked a little bit about in terms of you guys, the impact in terms of your site with what happened in George Floyd. But I've been having this conversation with Black expats in particular about what it feels like to see kind of a crisis unfold at home. And so obviously, Eulanda, you grew up in the US. So everyone saw what happened in the US, which actually just kind of spoiled and boiled over to the rest of the world, right? And then I was thinking about you and particularly what was happening in the fall in Nigeria with NSARS and a conversation and a movement about police brutality, right? Because up until this point, I think many of us had sort of seen it from a Western standpoint, or we'd seen it as Black people as minorities. But I think what was interesting about seeing NSARS was actually shining a light on what happens in the continent. And it isn't just Nigeria, because I could point out like 10 other countries where there's some version of police brutality against the native population. And so I was just curious what it's like for both of you in your respective homelands, give or take, what it was sort of like being in the UK and just seeing these become like international conversations, not just within the countries that you're both originally from.
Yeah.
Well, so the NSARS movement, I think was, the first thing I'll say about that is that it was long overdue. It was something that was an expression of pent-up frustrations, pent-up feelings by a lot of young people, not just young people, but the young people were actually speaking for the older people who didn't go out on the streets, but the young people were the ones carrying the message. But that message came from a place of frustration that had been building for decades. And so the movement itself was was long overdue and was needed for its at the time. It happened this year. Now, stepping back from that a bit, I think personally, I have had to take a slightly detached approach to Nigeria in general. When I first moved abroad, I carried that national fervor with me. I had this passion about Nigeria and about the country and its potential. I still believe in Nigeria's immense potential. But over the years, my expectations of what can actually happen and when it can happen has become more measured. So where 7-8 years ago on Facebook, I would be the one, flying the flag and fighting the battles on social media about, this politician and this particular policy or whatever. Now I tend to step back a bit and just look at the big picture. So the NSARS message itself, I knew was going to cause one of two things to happen. One, it would cause the country to look at itself and come to a place of reckoning and realize that this change is necessary, this change is long overdue. Or it could go the other way, which is a typical thing that happens in Nigeria, is the politicians and the hierarchy clamp down on this type of message of change and kill it out completely, which is what has happened, unfortunately. So I didn't get emotionally pulled into it until the most significant event happened, which was the shootings that happened at the Lekki toll gate. That's when I actually started to pay serious attention to it and get emotionally involved. And the feeling I had of being an expat and being away from the country at that time was one of just sadness. Sadness at the fact that the people in the political hierarchy and leadership didn't see the moment for what it was and what it could be and what it could have caused in terms of change. So that sadness and not being able to do anything about it was the feeling I came away with, unfortunately. I really want to, if there are any people listening to this podcast who were part of, that movement, I really praise you and praise all the people who were behind getting, rallying the youth together and getting the message out there. Well done. Right now, the message may have fizzled out, but you've started something, and I hope that will keep building. I hope generations following will build on that and keep pushing that message forward. So yeah, as an expat, it is frustrating and it's sad that I am not able to play a role, but I'm glad it happened. I'm glad that this flashpoint happened, and it's something we can look back to as a country and say, at some point in history, we said enough was enough. The message of police brutality is one that's global. It's, like you said, every country has its own form of police brutality in some way or the other. In the US, that may have come from a place of institutional racism. In Nigeria, it comes from a place of institutional corruption. And for me, that is something that I just still can't wrap my head around. And for that reason, I've taken a detached attitude towards Nigeria that, hopefully the change will happen, maybe in my lifetime, maybe not, but, well done to people who are trying to make some change happen.
And so Eulanda, who I'm half seeing you, I need you to slide over just because I'm going to basically say, let's juxtapose that with George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery. What was sort of your perspective now living in the UK and seeing that kind of unfold this summer?
It was a very visceral. Sorry, so sorry. I thought my phone started ringing. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Apologies, but for me, the experience of this summer, it was a very visceral and emotionally kind of taxing time, but also it was a time where I started to see a lot more hope for change. I felt like, because I'll tell you one conversation I was having with my father. My dad was born in 55, and so he's seen a lot, and I'm talking with him, and he's talking about, because he lives in Colorado, Denver, Colorado. And he was talking about how, there's just crowds of people protesting and how he's never seen anything like it, in all the years that he's lived in Colorado. And, although he wasn't like born in Colorado, he was born into the military, traveling as a military brat. And so he's, lived in lots of different countries. He's protested in different countries. He went to high school in the 70s. So and sported the full afro, was part of like Black Student Union, all that kind of stuff. And was one of the ones, I have this black and white picture of him, holding up a black power fist. And he's like, Eulanda, he's like, I'm seeing people use this. I'm seeing white people use black power fists. And he's like, in the beginning, he said, I was really bothered by it. And, we're just having a very frank conversation about this. And he's like, but he said, now he's like, I'm telling, like, gone ahead and use it. He's like, I realize some people don't even understand why they're raising their fist or how they're doing. But you know what? He says, the conversations are making, or people are waking up. Finally, people are starting to listen at a different level. And he said, even if it's for a short period of time, we can say that this period of time that people listened. And, on the other side of the fence of being someone who's, that in between like millennial, zennial kind of stage, we're like right at the top of the millennials and the end of the zennial.
Wait a minute. How top are you? Because I'm supposed to be like N Gen X. So I'm trying to figure out, wait a minute.
Yeah. So that.
Yeah. I think I'm either that. It depends on who you ask. You're
probably zennial. You're probably zennial.
I mean, wait. I ain't trying to put people's ages on blast out here. Like,
no, we don't care. We talk, because I'm like, I think we getting older.
Yeah.
So,
wait, what year were you born?
So I'm 78 and 78.
Okay, I'm a year younger. We in the same. Okay, I forgot. Because the way we were talking, I'm like, we ain't that far apart. Okay.
No. So it's zennial.
Yeah,
so that's
you're right.
Zennial,
right.
The top of millennial. Yeah. So yeah, it's interesting to see how like Gen Z is taking this movement and they're they're going in.
Right.
Like they're really going in. And that's been, for me, really exciting to see. And, with everything that went on this summer, it's like, I think every Black person, played some kind of role in being some type of educator at some point in time, unless they,
right.
You know what I mean? Like, Black person was everyone's favorite teacher.
Just because I'm Black doesn't mean I'm a DEI expert. I feel like y'all. Hold on. I know you're making a valid point, and I want people to get their coins, but you are not a DEI expert just because somebody came and
just because.
Lord,
tell you,
wow, boy,
it was a new monetization strategy.
No, and I'm smart enough to refer you to the Black people that have gotten doctorates and are doing this and are coaching, because the number of questions I've gotten, my answer is always the same. Don't be racist. And then I walk away. I'm like, and people are like, is that it? I said, that's it.
That's it.
Run me my check. There you go. So, but anyway, I'm sorry. You were saying, you were encouraged. That was a side note and a plug. It'll be on a bumper sticker. It'll be on a bumper sticker. I'm going to make my money off of that somehow.
Right. Like, make your money. Make your money. Please. But no, seriously, it's been like, I think with Gen Z, it's been really exciting to see how they've gone in and haven't necessarily, haven't been held up, by this feeling of, okay, well, this is what I can do and this is what I can't do. And I feel like whenever I was their age, I felt a lot of that.
Yeah.
A lot of times, like, even though I was extremely active, on my university campus with Black Student Services, I was at every march there was. Like, I was always speaking.
Yeah.
They called me the little rebel. I mean, it was, that was my persona. But still, yet, I'm seeing a different approach to getting the message out there, and a lot of it has become because of the freedom of social media, which is a good and bad thing, as we know, because social media can definitely be used for some of the most vile of things. But it's been really exciting to see how that access to social media and using it as a tool has just really amplified, the message, and has really exposed so many things that, I think that we are now just kind of seeing. Like, I was reading just this morning on New York Times about Breonna Taylor, and they did this whole visual investigation. I don't know if you saw it. I mean, but outside of just hearing the story of Breonna and her tragic death, then to see this kind of, this realization and this investigation, through a visual way, and then putting in all the footage. I know there's a documentary that has dropped as well. I think ABC has something to do with it, but I haven't seen that, but I did watch that visual investigation, and just how powerful that is. And like, you cannot ignore the evidence. And I'm thinking that a lot of that has to be because of social media and technology. And so times have really changed. It does not take away from, the way that our ancestors approach, like, civil rights movement or anything like that. Like, every time kind of has its place. But I, as just myself, as Eulanda, I got really excited seeing this younger generation just really kind of like take up the banner and say, we're not going anywhere. Also, the diversity of the protesters was really interesting to see.
I was going to say that. And in both cases, because I think social media, as much as I've worked with young people forever, I have college students now that I work with, and I used to worry about them and social media. But as this administration has showed me, really, it's the boomers you need to worry about that are on social media, because the boomers be saying some stuff. And I'm like, y'all gonna start wars with the stuff y'all saying. Like, the 17-year-olds over here are like hopping into white supremacist sites and having like K-pop dance offs. Y'all over here like saying stuff that might get people killed. And so I totally agree with you that it's real interesting to see folks that are much younger than us who the way they look at the world, they're looking at all these issues. Because if it was not for Twitter, right, I probably would have not known the great detail of what was happening in Nigeria, to be honest. Like, I wouldn't know. Yeah. And I love the fact that in the case of that people are like, okay, this is happening in Nigeria. While you're here, let me show you 5 other countries that are going through it right now on the continent. Yes. And so, yeah, I think that the young people who are on the ground who kept filming, and unfortunately we saw the violence up close. Like, you couldn't say you didn't see it, but if it wasn't for them. And so, I mean, I think I'm kind of with you where part of me is hopeful, but part of me is kind of got almost like, because there's a lot of stuff going on in Cameroon right now where, you know, we got a president who may need to move on. I will say that.
Oh, yeah. Let's just to put it mildly.
I'm putting it very mildly.
Long overdue.
He's been president since '82.
I was in primary school learning about him over 30 years ago. Let's just put it that way.
I mean, we want to get to it. My mama was like, we want to get to the details. But I think that being able to see all these other things, that's one of the beautiful things, I think, from social media. And so before I let you guys go, I like to do this thing called the lightning round. 3 questions, whatever comes up to your mind. No stress, just, you know. And then people have the same look every time. Yolanda looks cool. I'm almost like, what are these questions? Do I have to think about it? These are not hard. Well, I don't think they're hard hitting. We'll find out when I ask them. All right.
Okay, let's see.
First question. Ooh, and I had this for y'all. What is the best trip you've been on so far?
Together or apart?
I mean, however you want to, you can do both if you want.
Let's go together.
What do you mean apart?
Let's do it together. Yeah.
No, because we travel. We always travel connected to the hip.
Well, people don't, when people see couples, they don't realize that you might actually travel not with each other sometimes.
Yeah, we both have taken amazing trips without each other.
We do that sometimes, yeah. But I think as a couple, I think, Maldives.
See, you can't remember.
Sri Lanka.
He's like, as a couple, but then I bet you if I'm like, oh, which one, by yourself, he'd be like, Grenada or whatever. See what I mean? That's why I asked.
Well, when did you guys go to the Maldives? I feel like I saw the photos. Was it like?
Oh yeah, that's going back a few years.
That was 2015. That was so long ago.
No. Okay, so scratch that. No, we've been to so many amazing places since then.
It's one of my favorites. I think there's been like in the recent last few years was definitely 2018. We did a road trip through Costa Brava, Catalonia region in Spain. And it was just such a laid back trip. It was 2 weeks and we did a language class for a week, where we stayed in the city of Girona. But prior to that, we just hit up, like we were working with the tourism board. So that was really fun, but we didn't have to have this intense schedule where we had to be here and then we had to be there and there. So it was just an itinerary. And then of course, different places where we were staying, but it was amazing. Like the interviews we got and the stories picked up, the foods that we tried, being able to really immerse ourselves in language for a week. That was really fun. Yeah. So, and just kind of like go at our own pace.
Yeah.
And so we really enjoyed that, had a car and it was just really relaxed. So for us, it was, for me, it was one of my favorite trips for us.
I agree. That's the one.
I mean, I wouldn't have been mad at the Maldives. It's on my to-go places. The place I have, well, it's not quite the same region, but whatever. The place I happen is Seychelles, and let me tell you.
Yeah.
Have you guys been at all yet?
No, not yet.
When I lived in Qatar, this is slightly embarrassing, but not whatever. I told my family, you guys should come out. Let's go somewhere. In my brain, I was trying to say Sao Tome and Principe because they were coming from the eastern part of the U.S. It wouldn't be as long as a flight. But I said Seychelles, and since it got out there, everybody wanted to go to Seychelles. And but you know what? Look, if if I go, I may not be coming back. Internet's whack, but I may not be coming back. It is it's such a different part of Africa, right? So, but Maldives was like, when I remember looking at the map and it was like showing up, when you're flying in the little visual, and I was like, the Maldives. So, but all right. Second question. On your blog, what do you think is one post or page that really encapsulates what you're about? So if they can only read one thing off of your site, who's never been to your site, where should they go?
I'm gonna go back to the article that we mentioned earlier in the conversation. So you think you want to be an ally? I think that shows that tells a story about who we are and what we stand for. Mm-hmm. And anyone who's going to be consuming any other bit of content we put out there needs to know that this is who we are and this is how we see the world. And that hopefully will give them a better appreciation for all the other stuff we put out there. Yeah,
I agree.
Okay, let's drama over that question. All right.
Well, I could have said the plantain pancakes recipe post, but we'll just stick it with.
Wait a minute, you said there's a hold on. Side note, did you say there's a plantain?
Pancakes,
y'all!
Yeah.
I saw someone. This was 2 days ago. They're trying to make plantain ice cream. Oh, right. I got really my antenna went. Wait a minute.
Plantain has become a big deal now. People are trying to do all kinds of things with plantains now.
But I can't have it. Like I told you, at my sister's house, there's plantain fufu upstairs as we speak. So when I tell you, that's a very specific regional thing. But when I tell you, I am praying that it doesn't become, as lack of a better word, gentrified as some other foods. Because I can't have my plantain be like $2 a plantain because all of a sudden people want to eat it. Oh my gosh. You guys, thank you so much for coming up on the show. I am going to make sure that I put the link to your article as well to your site and your social media in the show notes, as well as up on our YouTube channel so that everyone can know where to find you. Because I think that you guys just give such a great perspective and you're doing some really awesome things. And besides, I think everyone should support Black content creators. So we know this. I'm me. This is not a hidden secret. I think that everybody should support all kinds of creators, but especially Black ones. And so thank you guys for coming on. Appreciate this.
The Global Chatter with the Black Expat is hosted by me, Amanda Bates. It is produced by Justin Williams. You can find the show wherever you get your podcast or follow us on our YouTube channel at The Black Expat Presents.